Thanks for joining us for the Keeping It Young podcast. Conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. My name is Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
We are the Youngs. We're glad you have joined us today. If you've been with us the last couple of weeks, you've been aware of the fact that we're talking about the art of communication. Mm-hmm. We actually had a 3-part series, and we decided to continue on with this idea of communication. And today we have a whole different avenue to talk to you about, and we want to just talk to you a little bit about the successfully maneuvering the difficult conversations. Mm. And all of us have them, and today we hope to help you with those.
Yes.
When it comes to difficult conversations, they are very normal in life. Every couple will have times where the conversation, the communication has a challenge to it.
Yes.
Today we want to talk to you about some of those. They're difficult or they're tough, or some people would call them hard conversations. And they occur in a multitude of ways. It could be because our feelings got hurt, or we're experiencing some challenges in the relationship. If things aren't well in your relationship, that's certainly going to cause you some challenges.
Right.
Sometimes they're difficult because we're not sure. We want to talk about something, but we're not sure how the spouse is going to respond.
Yes.
And that can be everything from talking about a matter of just something that's personal, or you're asking your spouse to change something, or you're talking about the children or the way your spouse is dealing with the children.
Right.
Or even the infamous maybe discussion about the in-laws, or some call them the outlaws. And I hope you're not one of those.
No.
When we have been putting off talking about an issue, that can become a problematic conversation as we've held it inside. I don't know how you guys are, but often for me and Bethany, the longer we hold it inside, the bigger it can get.
Oh, yes.
Because it compounds. What was a small issue some weeks back can be compounded.
Yes.
If you don't talk about an issue that's a tough situation, then everything else gets shifted through that particular hurt and added to it, so it compounds. When we know things aren't well, that's another challenging time.
Sometimes it's just a small daily conversation that just gets a little bit, shall we say, edgy.
Yes.
And then it turns into a difficult conversation.
Yes. Go ahead and tell them about our conversation last week a little bit.
Well, we walk in the mornings, and we were just taking our morning walk, and it was a beautiful sunshiny day. And I thought, this is a good opportunity to bring up a small thing, I would say maybe issue, but that's even too strong of a word, with one of our children that I just wanted to discuss with Dave, something that I thought maybe he could help me with. And so I'm trying to share my heart. And all of a sudden, he just seemed to take over the conversation and say, well, this is what we're going to do about it, and this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to think about it, and this is how you need to feel about it, and if you don't do it this way, then this and this is going to happen. And I felt a little bit, waylaid, like, oh my goodness, what just happened? This small thing, issue, difficulty that I was having in my heart over a child that I wanted to fix, all of a sudden was a difficult conversation.
And oddly enough, I'm not always maybe the smartest guy in the world when it comes to relationships. However, I picked up fairly quickly that something's not right here. And it might have been the fact that we were walking a little faster.
And I wasn't saying anything.
Or my wife had stopped talking. So that was a difficult conversation that we handled and took care of, and actually solve that situation. Or maybe it's the reason a conversation is difficult is because there's a topic that we've talked about before and it didn't go well.
Right.
And so returning to that topic is a challenge because we sift it through the last time. And so let's talk about that today. One of the things we want to talk to you about is that we are different in how we approach these matters. And just some suggestions, Beth and I want to share with you. And the first one is that God did design us to be differently, to see things differently and to handle things differently. Contrary to the culture we live in that wants us to believe that all of our differences are, sociological, or they are influenced by cultural matters. Really, our differences are created in us by our loving and almighty God. And so the way my wife is, the way she sees things, feels things, hears things, explains things, is often very different than how I would.
Yes.
And that can become a real source of frustration to a lot of couples, to where she's really frustrated that he's not understanding or not responding the way she is. And he can become frustrated that, this woman I married, what is wrong with her? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's just a matter of understanding that we are different. Men are not women, women are not men. And as odd as that sounds, that has to be said a lot in a marriage.
It's huge.
And it's just very important. And in light of that, not only to understand that we're different, but to allow those differences.
Yes.
I have to allow Bethany, and often I have to remind myself that what I'm hearing, I don't process it the same way. I process it as a guy.
Right.
And she processes the things I say as a lady. We have to allow those differences. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, I'm going to suggest to you that we have to embrace those differences. Mm. For your marriage to be everything it ought to be, for your communication skills to become what they ought to be, you have to embrace the differences.
Right.
And two quotes have stuck out with me. One is that somewhere along the way I heard a speaker say that faults in our spouse can become endearments. Mm-hmm. Meaning that maybe your spouse is one of the, this is how he always responds, or this is how she always talks, or or whatever the always may be. You can allow those things to become a thorn in your side. Is there a better way of saying that?
Just a constant
burr
frustration.
under your saddle, a constant frustration. Or you can allow those to become an endearment. The spouse who allows the weakness of their spouse to become something very endearing, I love you. Mm-hmm. I love that you're this way, and I'm here for you in that.
Right.
And it's not an excuse for things that are wrong. It's just it's a matter that you're my spouse and I love you. I
would just illustrate that with my mom and dad, and I certainly don't want to step out of turn here, but my mom has a fiery personality.
You could say that.
She's very passionate about life and about her opinions. And my dad, he's in heaven now, but my daddy just loved her and all of her passion and zest for life, even when it was coming out in a torrent of an opinion. He just thought it was the most endearing thing, and he just embraced it. He embraced who she was.
And sometimes he would just laugh.
Yes.
And sometimes he would say, Linda. Faults, yes. Another quote is that faults are arrows that point to a need God has called us to meet. So when I perceive a fault in Bethany, or she perceives a fault in me, rather than complain about those, rather than get angry about those, rather than get frustrated, I have to view those. Here's a need. This is an arrow pointing to a need that God has called me to meet.
Right.
And that really, really does help us in our marriage when I think that way. That
makes me think of that verse. I think it's in Proverbs where it talks about the odious woman. And you have often said in your sermons, the odious woman is the unloved woman.
Right.
We think of her as just being someone you don't want to be around.
Yeah, she's a bear.
Right. If your wife or husband is turning into someone that you don't want to be around, maybe they're not feeling the love or respect that God has called you to.
That's very true. So very true. So let's take the next little bit here and give some advice for both of you, and then we'll give some advice specifically to wives and some then to husbands. And let's start for the both of us, and just several things here. In the first place, understand, and we've already said this, but it's worth our saying again, understand that we handle these conversation matters differently.
Right.
Bethany would handle things totally different than me, and that's okay. She feels better if she can get it all out. And this is huge in a marriage. Bethany has to get it out in order to feel better.
Yes.
However, for the average guy, and obviously there's differences in these, so if you're not quite this way, this doesn't mean you're weird or odd, but this is a general assessment. Whereas she feels better if she can get it all out, he feels better if he can forget it and move on. And can you already see there's this is just a situation volatile.
An opportunity for a hard conversation.
Absolutely. In other words, you could say it like this: she needs to talk now. She needs to talk right now. She's feeling it. I got to talk now so I can move on. He needs to think it through so he can move on.
Yes.
I don't want to talk about it. I want to think it through. I want to assess it. I want to evaluate where I am in it. What do I need to do differently? Make a few personal thoughts in my heart and mind, and move on with my life. I can move on like that. My wife cannot. Your wife cannot either. If she has angst in her heart, it's not a matter of forget it and move on. If she holds it in, it will compound. And I promise you, it will compound.
It will come out.
And there will be a pretty impressive chemical reaction someday in which something will become very explosive. Just understanding that will really help you. So when it comes to a difficult conversation and you're aware of a situation, remember to share your story, not just your angst. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we come in and we share I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you say that.
Right.
Why did you do that? What is wrong with you, kind of thing. Rather than to share the story. When you're married, you have a story. The two of you together have a story. And you apply the angst, the issue to your story. You loved him. That's why you married him. You thought she was amazing. That's why you married her. And if you take the issue out of that story, it becomes very personal attack. And a personal attack, by nature, always results in a pushback.
Right.
And so that's a huge thing to remember.
So what you mean is take the issue and put it in context of,
yes.
I love you, you love me.
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll say that very specifically
Very
in a
good.
moment. Now, my wife disagrees a little bit with this, but I always feel like we need a proper time, schedule a proper time to handle these issues. And sometimes I know that maybe the reason we have issues in our marriage when we're having a discussion issue is that Bethany will bring something up, or I will bring something up that catches the other one either off guard because they didn't see that coming, they didn't know that was an issue, or they don't. Sometimes Bethany will say something, and part of the issue last week was this was a bigger issue to her than I realized. So we're walking, and she starts sharing a story, and I'm like, oh, yeah, we can take care of that, and here's how we're going to do it, and we got to be careful about this. So from my perspective, I'm just communicating, but at the same time, in my response to it the way that I didn't realize, wow, this is a bigger deal. And so making sure you have a proper time to talk about something is huge.
Right.
And then I say this one a lot in our conferences, but I'm going to say it again. Shout your love louder than any of your disagreement. I love you, but I need to talk to you about something.
Right.
I respect you, but I still need to talk to you about something. And so then let's talk about perception.
Can we go back to the time just
yes,
for a second?
Go back to the time.
Just from my perspective, just giving the ladies a perspective on this from my perspective would be you don't have to actually schedule a time. It's not like you're sitting down at breakfast in the morning and saying, okay, at 2:00, you're free, I'm free, we're going to do this. But making sure you have time. You know, yelling a snarky remark at your husband as he goes out the door for work is not a good time for you to bring up a difficult issue. Doing something or saying something like that while you're getting ready to bathe the children and put them to bed, or if you have anything else to do. So save it if you can. And if you feel like that angst is just going to come out, then just say to your husband, hey, I have something I really want to talk to you about. Can we talk later? And then let him set up the time.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So talking about perception a little bit here, one of the things we would want to point out to you is that we have to recognize that perception is valid. So that sometimes there's an issue in which I know that what Bethany is saying is not what I was thinking. I know that how she saw it is not at all what I intended.
Right.
And early in our marriage, she would share something from how she perceived it, and I knew that wasn't the right way. And I say early, but it's still something I always have to remind myself and deal with. A lot of times I would deal with things by being defensive. That is not what I meant. That is not what I said. That is not what I intended. You didn't hear that right. You didn't hear that. You're thinking that wrong.
Why would you think that?
And what is wrong with you? But what we have had to learn is that perception is valid.
Yes.
Our perceptions will likely be different. So rarely do Bethany and I come to an issue and we're on the same page and we see it. If it were that way, it wouldn't be an issue. And the reason we have a problem is because I see it one way, she sees it another, or she saw it a certain way and shared it, and I responded in a way that caused her to feel that I was attacking, or
Right.
I responded in a way because I felt attacked.
Right.
But it's helpful to realize that perceptions are valid. You have got to understand that. Typically, she wants you to acknowledge her feelings and admit that you made her feel that way and that you're sorry for hurting her or for making her feel that way. And I even have shared this many times. There's even a way to say that. Gentlemen, listen very carefully. You can say to your wife, I can see that I hurt you in that way, because see, that's perception. I'm aware of the fact that she's hurt.
Yes.
Maybe I didn't mean it. Maybe it's not what I intended. Maybe she completely misunderstood. But the fact is, she's hurt. That's her perception is different than what I intended. So the way to handle that is to acknowledge that with our words. Remember Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5 says that the husband is a picture of Christ who loves his church.
Right.
And so many times, guys, we're of the opinion that, well, you know what, we got a problem here and I'm not saying anything. Or we like to think it through and move on with our life. No communication is the average guy's response. But the Bible tells us that Christ loved his church and gave himself for it, that he might wash it with the water of his word. God uses his word to grow his bride,
Yes.
to encourage his bride, to strengthen his bride, to help his bride.
Right.
And it's a good reminder, gentlemen, that so many times we men think, I don't need to converse. I'm a guy. Guys don't talk. Well, that is the mindset of a world under the curse of sin. But as believers, we as men are to be like Jesus Christ, who loves his church and uses the word, literally the word of God. But in the illustration there, he's talking about a husband and a wife, Christ and the church and a husband and a wife. And we have got to use our words. So we say, look, I can see that I hurt you in that way, and I'm sorry that I made you feel that way. Please forgive me and let me make it up to you. You have to find your version of that and maybe even her version of that. What works to her that makes her feel like, okay, he understands me.
Something understanding.
He understands me. And the only way she knows that you understand her is for you to acknowledge her perception.
Right.
Not defend your right or point out how she's wrong.
It sounds like that verse in 1 Peter 3, dwell with your wife according to knowledge.
Yes. And as you understand your wife's need there, and it's not just your wife, gentlemen, this is across the border. All marriages are this way. Typically, ladies, he wants you to acknowledge that you know he didn't mean to make you feel that way and that he's okay. Because sometimes, a husband can come to you and say, okay, I understand, and you forgive me and let me make it up to you. And you're like, oh, you better understand. And,
you better be sorry.
And now your problem is bigger. There's no way to end it.
Right. I heard this one illustration about, you're right, and I better be taken out on a date on Friday night instead of cooking dinner for you because you won't have any dinner on this table Friday night. I actually heard that,
and that
from someone's mouth.
That will actually not solve your problem.
No.
Now you have a bigger problem.
Yes.
And so sticking with the issue at hand, the perception matters. So he wants you just to acknowledge, I can see that you didn't mean to make me feel that way, and I'm okay. And so you say it like, I said to the husband, say it like this, I can see that I hurt you in that way and I'm sorry. Then you have to say something to the effect, it's okay and I forgive you and I know you didn't really mean to make me feel that way.
Right.
And even express, well, thanks for letting me talk
Absolutely.
through it.
Yes.
Sharing the gratitude with each other. Thanks for hearing me out.
Yes.
Thanks for talking to me about this.
Yes.
Thanks for trying to understand me.
Loving me when I'm unlovely.
And
yes.
we do that a lot. So that's just some thoughts for both of you about how to have these hard conversations. Billy, talk to the ladies a little bit. Any specific advice for the wife to understand how to have these hard conversations?
Right. The first verse that comes to mind is in 1 Peter 3, where it says that the lady is to have a meek and quiet spirit. And I know probably all of you listening have different personalities. That does not mean that you're quiet and mousy all the time and you never say anything. And if your husband hurts your feelings, it's no big deal. You just let it roll off of you because you're a girl and it's not going to roll off of you. So the context there is just having a spirit of peace. So even when your heart is hurt, you feel misunderstood, you feel like he forgot something he should do, or he's not responding to you the way that you would like him to respond, just remember, keep your spirit at peace. And you do that by praying because you can't do it yourself. The Lord is the Lord of peace. and he can give you that peace of heart. So pray first, talk to the Lord, ask him to give you that meek and quiet spirit. And then when you go to your husband, of course, recognizing that it needs to have that proper timing. You need to have that proper tone from Proverbs 15, a soft answer. Recognize that your husband is not you. So you open your heart to him and you say all this stuff, and then he responds to you like a man, and you're shocked. Well, why? Why are you shocked? Because he is a man. Yes. So remember that. He's not going to respond to you the way your sister or your girlfriend or your mom or your favorite aunt is going to respond to you and be like, oh, honey, I know. No, he's not going to do that. And then remember that God designed you to have a leader. In Ephesians chapter 5, the Bible does tell us that the man is the leader of the home. And I'm not talking about necessarily leading the conversation, but we're talking about is that your husband is going to want to come up with a solution. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you don't want to hear a solution. You just want to get your heart out there. And he starts to give you a solution, and you think, wait, I don't want you to solve the problem. But God designed him to be the leader. That's so sometimes you may just need to say, you know what? I don't want to hear a solution right now. I know we're going to need one, but right now I just want you to hear my heart. At least he's prepared for that.
Ladies, that's huge for me when Bethany does that.
Yeah, and then later, consider the solution because he is the leader.
Yeah. So that's really good. For the husband, I would just share with you to remember that your wife is not a man. God designed her to be a lady. She's emotional. Don't complain about that. Don't make a big deal about that. That's God's design in her life. Mm-hmm. And that's why she's the beautiful, delicate, amazing, wonderful person you married. She's designed that way. And just remember that God called you to lead. He designed her to feel. He designed you to fix, if I could say it that way. Mm-hmm. He designed you to lead. And part of leading is having discernment. Mm-hmm. So it's listening. And I suggest to you men, when you know your wife has an issue or you have an issue and you're talking about things, learn to listen for understanding. Don't defend. Don't make accusations. Don't roll your eyes. Don't huff and puff and try to blow the house down.
Right.
Listen to understand. And part of your leadership responsibility is discerning. Does she just need a listening ear right now, someone to hear her? Mm-hmm. Or does she need someone to repair an issue here?
Right.
And whereas Bethany just said to the ladies, tell them, I'm saying to you men, ask her.
Yes.
Yesterday we were in the kitchen and my wife, our family had, we're home at this COVID-19 time. And so we'd had a meal together and, mm-hmm. One of the pans, something was stuck to a pan.
I had put foil on the pan so that the food wouldn't stick to the pan, but then the foil stuck to the pan.
And it was, it was getting a little annoying. And so she said something about it. And our son, Jacob, who is 17 this coming week,
yes,
our son, Jacob, he responded and then he said, wait a minute. He said, was that something you just wanted me to feel or something you wanted me to fix?
Yes, because he said, well, Mom, use the spatula. And then he said, oh, did you want me to fix that?
So we know that he's been listening as we've been preparing these messages to share with you. We're about out of time. The tough conversations are easier if you're already committed to and working on your marriage.
Yes.
And honestly, if you're in love, tough conversations come. You don't let those become the defining challenge of your marriage. You have the conversation. You listen. If you can't solve it at the time, you say, you know what, we can't solve this right now.
Right.
But I love you. I respect you. I'm all about you. And sometimes in these tough conversations, we need counsel. And so just before we go, I just want to remind you, your pastor, your pastor's wife, your small group leader, your Sunday school teacher, an elder you respect.
Right, a Titus 2 lady in your church.
A Titus 2 lady.
Just being very careful not to go to someone who's just going to bounce your ideas around. You need someone who actually is going to counsel.
And instruct and counsel, encourage, direct, and help. And so this is just some thoughts about how to have a tough conversation. And obviously there'd be a lot more we could probably say, but our time is gone. This is Keeping It Young, and Beth and I want to say thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production. All rights reserved.